Hello, good evening. Welcome everybody. Hello. No, it doesn't work. No, it does work. Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for coming to this event, which is an event on Russian anti-war resistance and political opposition to Putin's regime. We have an outstanding panel of speakers, which is important because it's also an event which is part of a bigger conference forum of association which is called Russie-Libertés, which is happening today and tomorrow. This is just one event which we at Sciences Po are very proud to host here. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sergei Guriev. I'm a provost at Sciences Po. But here I'm not going to speak, I'm going to chair this event. Before giving floor to our panelists, I would like to give floor to Olga Prokopieva, who is a spokesperson for Russie-Libertés, and she will say a few words about the forum and about Russie-Libertés. Olga, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm Olga, and first of all, I want to thank Sciences Po, Marie Mandras, Sergei Guriev to welcome us here today. It's really important for us to speak in this institution. Really happy to be here. So as Sergei mentioned, this conference is part of our annual forum that we organize every year. The goal of this forum is to give the possibility for different Russian voices who are opposed to war and opposed to regime, who fight for their liberties and for justice in Russia, to be able to present their fight here in France to French public. And of course, we are really happy to be able to organize this event in partnership with Institut Français, with Free Russia Foundation, with Amnesty International, Les Nouveaux Dissidents, and other partners, Reporters Sans Frontières, etc. You can see the full program of the forum on our website, russie-liberté.org. I don't know how to say it in English. So now, really, I leave the, the discussion to these wonderful people, and welcome to you all. And if you have any information about our association, don't hesitate to ask us after the conference. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Olga. Before we proceed, I would like to remind you that Russian opposition is not only people who are here who can speak to you, but also people who are far away. Unfortunately, some of them are in prison, and this is why I would like to ask Alexis Prokopiev, who is a founder, or the founder, no, one of two founders of Russie-Libertés, who worked with Russian opposition leaders for many years, and in particular with Ilya Yashin, and he wants to read us an excerpt from his letter from prison. Alexei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergei. Dear all, it's an honor for me to read you today during this conference and in the frame of this forum a letter from a great friend of mine, a great person, one of the leaders of the Russian opposition, Ilya Yashin, who is currently in jail in Russia because of his strong opposition against the war in Ukraine. I will read a short version of his speech published today in the newspaper Le Monde. The Russian authorities decided to silence me, sentencing me to 8.5 years in prison for publicly speaking against Putin's war in Ukraine. But I refuse to remain silent. I want my voice, the voice of a Russian patriot opposing war and dictatorship, to be heard. It's crucial for me to be able to speak honestly to my fellow countrymen, even behind bars. But I also understand the importance of dialogue with the world. So I'm grateful to the organizers of the forum for the opportunity to address you today. The massive attack on Ukraine was possible for several reasons. First and foremost, it's the responsibility of Russians, including myself. As a representative of Russian people, sadly, we allowed a revanchist dictatorship to be formed in our country and failed to create effective mechanism in public control over the government and security forces. As the sayings go, we sacrificed freedom for order and prosperity, but in the end, we lost freedom, order, and prosperity. Now, we have earned the reputation of occupiers. We will be paying for these mistakes for a very long time. However, I also want to remind you of the international community's responsibility, which for many years appeased the Putin's aggressive regime and thus repeated a historical mistake that once propelled Europe into World War II. For 2 decades, Putin got away with almost everything: usurpation of power, corruption, destruction of the opposition, political assassinations, military interventions and annexions of foreign territories. In the eyes of the West, Putin continued to remain a legitimate president even in 2020, after organizing the constitutional consultation, after which he reset his terms and gained the opportunity to run for president again. Meanwhile, independent experts reported unprecedented fraud and 22 million essentially anomalous ballots in the vote. The same year, Alexei Navalny was poisoned. Thanks to investigative journalists, it was revealed that Alexei, who thankfully survived, was not the only victim of Putin's poisoners. The Russian dictator was slovenly received in world capitals. They bought oil and gas from him, sold him parts of weapon system and technologies, and treated him as an equal. Such a policy ultimately gave Putin a sense of total permissiveness and absolute impunity. We must address this problem together. In the West, it's commonly believed that the Russian people today unanimously support the war and thirst for Ukrainian blood. I assert that this is not the case. Yes, many of my fellow citizens have been deceived by propaganda and intimidated by repression. That's true. But Putin has still failed to turn his aggression into a people's war. A vast number of Russians have gone abroad to avoid army conscription and did not take up arms. A significant part of the society has chosen internal immigration and remained silent, fearing criminal persecution. The army is in a part made of mercenaries motivated by money and criminals recruited to the front with promises of rehabilitation. Yet, there are no queues to the army military enlistment offices, no public enthusiasm. Once again, no signs that Putin's war is a popular war. The number of political prisoners now is over 1,000. Sketching a portrait of the average Russian political prisoner arrested for anti-war protest is challenging. They are all so diverse. Behind bars are hundreds of people: teachers, retirees, students, workers, regional journalists, a social cross-section of an entire society. This is our people. You might ask, what do a few hundred political prisoners mean in a country of millions? My response is, hundreds of people is quite a significant number when it's about consciously choosing to sacrifice freedom, comfort, health, career, and one's family to say truth, one's conscience not to remain silent. This is about a couple of days in a 50-sleeping cell of a detention center, of 15 days in a special facility. It's not about that. We have tens of thousands of those. It's about years of constant humiliation, uncertainty, and the separation from the loved ones. Have you heard how the children of the dissidents are sent to social institutions? The 13-year-old Masha Moskalyava, who drove an anti-war picture, was separated from her father and sent to shelters. These repressions are enough for many Russians to choose silence. The real Russia is not fighting Ukrainians on the front line. The real Russia is in jail and also writes letters to political prisoners, collects money and packages to send to detention centers. In a single day of YouTube campaign, Russians raised 40 million of rubles to help political prisoners, even with the difficulties associated with the widespread blocking of Russian cards. The real Russia assists hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees who have found themselves in our country. They are assisted with clothing and food, the injured are hospitalized, and thousands are taken abroad for Jews who want to live in Europe. Mostly silently, so as not to harm those they help. Unpublicitedly, but every day over a year, hundreds of cars with Russian plates are transporting Ukrainian families to the borders. To successfully counter Putin, it's necessary to make the people of Russia allies of the international coalition that has risen to defend Ukraine, allies of the entire free world. For this, and very least, the rhetoric towards our citizens needs to be changed. I ask you to clearly distinguish between the military criminals who have seized power in the Kremlin and ordinary citizens who find themselves in Russia as hostages and live with their eyes shut. Some of fear for their lives and their future, and some out of shame and horror of what is happening. Finally, the most important thing, let's show Russian society an image of Russia's future. I want Russians to become allies of the civilized world. We should not paint an apocalyptic picture of our cities turned into ruins and speak of the inevitable disintegration of our country. Instead, let's explain to people that Russia without Putin is about building, not destroying. It will be a free, happy, and peaceful country where people want to live, work, and raise families. It's not an utopia, it's possible. Dear friends, I understand that our society bears a huge responsibility to the people of Ukraine for the monstrous crimes committed by our government in our name. We will try to fully make up for this guilt. One day, I will come to Kiev and ask for forgiveness. But Russia will be always next to Ukraine and Europe. Historically and geographically, we are neighbors. Therefore, let's be wise. Let's think together about tomorrow and how to prevent the recurrence of the current tragedy. Ilya Yashin.
Thank you very much. Before we start our panel, Marie Mandras asked me to say that we've also invited, since Ilya mentions in his letter Alexei Navalny, we've invited colleagues of Alexei Navalny, and they unfortunately could not make it tonight. With that, let us pass to the panelists. Each panelist will speak for 5-7 minutes. Then Marie, as a discussant, will also speak, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. The first speaker is Evgenia Karamurza, who is an advocacy coordinator at the Free Russia Foundation. She's also a wife of Vladimir Karamurza, who is now in prison. Vladimir is a unique individual who was poisoned twice by Vladimir Putin and survived. And I vividly remember that between the two poisonings, I was talking to Vladimir about why he wants to come back, and he's always been extremely convincing and determined that this is his job to fight for the future of peaceful and democratic Russia. But that, of course, bears a huge cost to Vladimir himself and to his family, his wife Evgenia and his 3 children. And now, as he is locked away in faraway part of Russia, Evgenia carries on this fight and continues to promote the cause of democratic Russia and fights for the rights of Russian political prisoners and opposes this brutal and unjust war. Evgenia, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Is it working?
Yeah, it's working. You start speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And it is an extreme pleasure for me to be here for many reasons. Well, to start with the fact that anyone who ever learned French, considered Sciences Po this legendary place, and it is an extreme honor for me to be here in these walls, and I'm quite disappointed that I don't get to speak French tonight. I want to say thank you to the organizers of this event, and to say how honored I am to be in the company of such highly distinguished co-panelists. Well, the letter of Ilya Yashin said it all, hasn't it? It's very little to add to it. I just was in Geneva just a few days ago, and when I saw the first ever UN Special Rapporteur on the situation with human rights in Russia, Madam Katsarova, here today, I remembered about that event that we recently had in Geneva, and there I said that in 2018, when my husband was receiving his his award from the Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy, he mentioned 117 political prisoners in his speech. And he then said that this number was quite comparable to the number of political prisoners in the 1970s, when Andrei Sakharov mentioned 126 political prisoners in his Nobel speech. Of course, these numbers were both conservative, but so are the numbers that we have today. Because according to Memorial, Russia's most respected human rights organization that was itself, of course, banned in Russia like anything else that has to do with human rights, the number of political prisoners in the Russian Federation reached 600 people. They say, of course, that this number is truly conservative, and that's according to Sergei Davidis, who's the head of Support for Political Prisoners project within Memorial. This year marked the 20th anniversary of the imprisonment of Alexei Pichugin, the last hostage of the Yukos case, held behind bars in violation of 2 decisions by the European Court of Human Rights and several Committee of Ministers' demands for his unconditional release. According to OVD Info, around 20,000 people have been arbitrarily detained across the country for anti-war protests, and among them were at least 565 minors, including 16-year-old Nikita Uvarov, who was sent to prison for 5 years for planning to blow up a virtual FSB building in the computer game Minecraft. The Russian authorities are using the entire arsenal of Soviet-style repressive techniques against anyone who dares oppose the war and dares oppose the regime, including punitive psychiatry, like in the case of journalist Maria Ponomarenko, like extreme violence and sexual violence, like in the case of poet Artem Kamardin. Tens and tens, well, hundreds now, of people have been prosecuted and are already serving their sentence for a simple no to the war. And just like Alexis just read from the letter of Ilya Yashin, these are people from all walks of life, from all regions. Protests have been reported in at least 79 Russian regions. It's people whose stories need to be known and whose names need to be heard. This is political scientist Yevgeny Bestuzhev, lawyer Dmitry Talantov, artist Alexander Skochelenko, whose mother will be speaking tomorrow at the event organized by Russie-Libertés and other human rights organizations who participated in the organization of this event. It's activist in Buryatia, Natalia Filonova. Her son was taken away from her. She was thrown in prison, and her son was put in an orphanage. Thus, she was basically deprived of her parental rights. It is Vladimir Rumyantsev, a stoker. It is Sergei Vedel, former police officer. It is, there are so many people that I could tell you their stories for a very long time, and 5 minutes will definitely not be enough. As a mother, I have been absolutely shocked by the story of Masha and Alexei Moskalyov. Masha is a 13-year-old girl whose father was put in prison for 3 years because she had drawn an anti-war picture at school. And the Russian authorities deemed him unable to raise a strong Russian citizen. In her letter from the orphanage to her father in prison, she wrote, "You are the best dad in the world. There is no one better than you. Please don't give up. You're a hero, my hero." I look at my kids and I think about Masha's letter to her father. And I think about all the times that my kids are missing now with their father. All the heartbreak, all the tears and the pain. Because yes, I'm often asked in my interviews, well, you're fighting, you're continuing the work of your husband, you're talking about political prisoners, but how about the personal side of it? Because this is personal. Oh, of course, this is definitely personal, very personal, as it is for Masha Moskalova's father, as it is for Tatiana Usmanova, the wife of Andrei Pivovarov, as it is for Natalia Filonova, who was deprived of the right to raise her son, as it is for thousands and thousands of Russian citizens. They are also Russia. My husband is also Russia. And that is the reason he went back again and again. When he returned in 2015, several months after his first poisoning, he'd only just relearned how to walk, and he was wobbling around with this cane of his. And I asked him, well, the wind is going to carry you away. How are you going to even physically do that? He went back to Moscow in December, of course. And he just smiled and he said, well, you know why. And I do know why. I refused to pack his bags. That was my protest. But I know why. I know why, and this is why I'm going to be standing for as long as it takes me, and why I will be fighting for as long as it takes me, and tell you about the stories of these people again and again and again, because they are also Russia. And I want when last year the Moscow Regional Court stripped environmental activist Arshak Mikichan of his Russian citizenship for opposing the war in Ukraine, he said, and I quote, "The Russian state stripped me of my one and only citizenship. Many would say that I should be glad because I am officially no longer a part of the state that rapes and kills women and children in Ukraine, occupies 20% of Georgia and tortures its own citizens. But the Russian state is not the entire Russia, and I cannot stop being part of the country I love." It says it all. We are also Russia, and we see our country a very different country. We see it based on the rule of law and respect for human rights. We see it a respectable partner on the international stage. We see it respecting the rights of its neighbors and the rights of its own citizens, of course. And we will continue fighting for it. And this atrocious regime will not be able to silence us. And I will not allow them to silence Vladimir's voice. I will keep talking, giving him my voice today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. I would now like to give floor to Vadim Prokhorov, who is a lawyer of Vladimir Kara-Murza and a former lawyer of Alexei Navalny and Ilya Yashin and of the late Boris Nemtsov. And the list is long. A lot of people you know who continue to fight Putin's regime from inside and from outside have been and still are Vadim's clients. Usually, you know that the job of a lawyer is sacred. The governments usually don't attack lawyers who represent clients. Usually, governments respect the lawyer's right to represent even those people that they treat as criminals. Yet in Vadim's case, he himself had to leave Russia. And this is also showing how difficult the situation in Russia is, not just for people who fight against the regime, but also for people who just do their job, protecting the political and legal rights of the opposition leaders. Vadim, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, I'm very thankful to the organizers of this forum for the invitation, and I'm glad to take advantage of this opportunity. What could I say about the stated agenda? The situation in Russia, the treatment of political prisoners, anti-war resistance inside and outside Russia, perspectives for a transition period in Russia after the war, and how we in Europe can help. First of all, I would like to note that the Putin regime's preparations for future aggression and an attack on civil society, in my opinion, started to have begun long time ago, at least after the invasion to Georgia in 2008. At first, very gently, and then increasingly, obvious repressive changes were made to Russian legislation. In particular, in 2012, a new version of Article 275 of the Russian Criminal Code, high treason, was adopted in an extremely expanded version. The very one under which Vladimir Kara-Murza was recently convicted. In fact, the absolutely comprehensive text of this article of the Russian Criminal Code makes it possible to charge and imprison for many years anyone whose activities do not please the current Russian political regime. Over the past 15 to 20 years, many other repressive changes and amendments have been made to the Russian legislation on foreign agents, on criminal liability for cooperation with the so-called undesirable organizations, and many others. And immediately after the Putin's regime full-scale invasion to Ukraine, cannibal changes were made to Russian criminal law, allowing for years of imprisonment for any criticism of the military aggression in Ukraine. In particular, the infamous so-called anti-fake Article 207.3 of the Russian Criminal Code. For example, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, Alexei Gorinov, and many others have been sentenced to years in prison on this charge. And it is now, these days, that additional changes are being adopted to the legislation on the so-called fight against so-called extremist activity. New terrible amendments are being introduced. And kind words about Navalny, for example, and his organization, will be prosecuted with a multi-year imprisonment. It faces up to about 5 years of imprisonment. So Russia now has a terrible situation, just like similar to the Stalin's epoch, in my opinion. And when absolutely anyone whose activities displease the Russian regime can be prosecuted. According to Memorial, there are now more than 600 political prisoners in Russia, but in reality this number is probably much, much higher. And the fate of current political prisoners in Russia is a matter of serious trouble. Obviously, any war ends sooner or later. And this war, this one, will end as well. And in my opinion, it's extremely important for the international community, along with other demands to Putin's regime after the war or to the future regime of Russia, to the Russian authorities, to formulate a clear demand: the release of all Russian political prisoners. For example, through an amnesty or by the other way, and it must be included to any of the post-war settlement plan. But there are many Russian political prisoners who may simply, maybe they will not save their lives, and they are not able to survive to see the end of the war, unfortunately. We are particularly concerned about the health of Vladimir Karamurza, Alexei Gorinov, Alexei Navalny, and a number of others. International solidarity with for the release of the Russian political prisoners and constant attention of the international community to their fate are absolutely necessary, in my opinion. It's particularly alarming that these political prisoners who don't have good health are awarded new and new terms of detention in so-called SHIZOs, cell-type punishment rooms in prisons with even more difficult conditions of detention on false grounds. It should be remembered that back in the Soviet period, the lives of many Soviet dissidents were saved through international exchange. For example, Vladimir Bukovsky, Alexander Ginsburg, Natan Sharansky, and others. And I believe that an appropriate international campaign of solidarity with Russian political prisoners could be a good initiative for the world community, and it will save their lives. It is necessary to draw the attention of the governments of democratic countries to this problem in order to solve this issue. What else could Russian activists and Russian NGOs from abroad do? I would claim a few areas. I have already mentioned helping Russian political prisoners and drawing attention to their fate. I should also mention the need to help illegally captured Ukrainian citizens on the territory of Russia, displaced persons whose future is often unknown to their relatives and friends. Only attention to their lives and to the timely intervention of Russian lawyers can help to ensure a minimum level of security for them, stop torture, restore contact with their colleagues and relatives and friends, and put them on the appropriate list for exchange, etc. I would like to note that many Russian lawyers, our colleagues, brave colleagues, currently sometimes in exile, but many of them work in Russia, providing them with the necessary assistance, often confidentially. And I would like to mention in this respect the work of the different Russian heritage organizations abroad, for example, Free Russia Foundation or Centre de la Protection Internationale and some others. Another important area for my colleagues in exile is supporting and promoting sanctions against human rights violators in Russia, including the legal level. This applies first and foremost to lawyers. This is the same line of work that began about 10 years ago with the Magnitsky list, in the initiation and advocacy of which Vladimir Karamurza took an active part, as everybody knows. Now this activity in connection with Russia's full-scale aggression is of particular importance, in my opinion. Here too, assistance in the development of new and the use of existing international tools and mechanisms for bringing war criminals to justice and it's very, very important, in my opinion. I think that in this respect, Russian lawyers, including those in exile, could provide assistance to the international community. Bringing criminals to justice for war crimes is the protection of human rights also. And the protection of human rights is international, universal, and cross-border. It's not the subject of sovereignty, as some of the Russian authorities could try to claim. For example, my friend and colleague, famous lawyer Sergei Golubok, he's here, I think he could talk more about it. It's a very, very important problem. And finally, one more area of activity that I would like to mention. This is the preparation of a body of new progressive legislation for the future democratic Russia. Of course, sometime in the future, the Putin regime will crash. And that is when it's necessary to prepare bills which will be urgently needed for the rapid adoption by the new democratic Russian government. But when will that happen? I don't know. I wish it will be sooner. But unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic as many of my colleagues. Even crash and fail in an aggressive criminal war does not necessarily lead to the collapse of dictatorship regime. For example, let me remind you that the crash and defeat of Saddam Hussein in Kuwait in 1991 and in 1992 itself did not automatically lead to his departure from power, unfortunately. But, I think that we'll have to prepare for a long-term struggle, something like a marathon maybe. But the historical collapse of Putin's regime is absolutely obvious, and we need to work in this direction now and constantly. And I think that our future depends on all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to ask now Timofey Martynenko, who is a coordinator of Youth Anti-War Movement, Youth Democratic Anti-War Movement Vesna, to speak. For those of you who don't know, Vesna is a bottom-up, recently established by the standards of Russian democratic opposition, movement of young people who bravely took to the street and protested against the non-democratic regime, and later, already after the full-scale invasion, protested against the war as well. Timofey will speak in Russian and will have a consecutive translation.
Да, спасибо большое. Работает? Спасибо за приглашение. Меня зовут Тимофей Мартыненко, я представитель молодежного демократического движения «Весна», российского движения, которое было, к сожалению, фактически выдавлено из России. Мы признаны нежелательно НКО, посягающим на права граждан, иностранным агентом, экстремистской организацией. В общем, мы собрали практически все статусы, которые только было возможно.
Hello, my name is Timofey Martynenko. I represent Vesna Young Activists Movement. We are a Russian organization that have been squeezed out of Russia, and we have collected almost all the possible charges. We were called a hostile NGO, an extremist organization, and the rest.
6 человек находятся по нашему делу в СИЗО в настоящее время. Их судят по огромному количеству статей, до 6 статей Уголовного кодекса. Им грозят чудовищные сроки, причем большинство из них никак уже с нами давно действительно не были связаны. Еще... прошу прощения. Да, 6 человек находятся в СИЗО по нашему делу, еще 9 человек, в том числе я, преследуются в уголовном порядке за нашу антивоенную активность и деятельность.
6 persons who were part of our young activist movement are now in places of temporary detention, and they are charged with charges according to 6 articles of the criminal code, and they have monstrous imprisonment terms that are now threatened, that they are being threatened with, and 9 more people are being prosecuted criminally, including me. With some of, at the same time, the movement has almost no connection with some of these 6 people who are now in places of temporary detention.
Я на панели, кажется, единственный представитель низового и молодежного движения. Я бы, наверное, хотел начать с того, что поблагодарить своих коллег и сказать, что «Весна» далеко не единственное подобное низовое движение. Я хотел бы поблагодарить феминистское антивоенное сопротивление, Сахаровское движение за права человека и множество других организаций, которые продолжают работать в России, несмотря на репрессии, которые децентрализуются, меняют свою работу, меняют свою структуру, подстраиваются под условия, которые создает путинский режим, выживают на фоне репрессий, но продолжают работать. И поскольку у меня немного времени,
I need to note that Vesna is not the only organization in Russia. I'm the only representative of a grassroots activist organization here, but we are not the only ones. We know that I would like to use this opportunity and thank my colleagues from the feminist anti-war movement, from Sakharov movement for human rights. These are the organizations that are currently operating in Russia, that are adapting to the current Russian situation, although it is very hostile. They are getting decentralized and are trying to adapt their structure.
И, конечно, я бы хотел поблагодарить огромное количество тысячи активистов, простых российских граждан, которые остаются в России, продолжают бороться, продолжают проводить акции, продолжают агитировать против войны, против режима, выступают за демократию. Они не находятся с нами в одних залах зачастую. Чаще всего мы даже не знаем их имена, потому что мы вынуждены работать децентрализованно и анонимно. Но это огромное количество людей, которые остаются в России. И, опять же, поскольку немного времени, я хотел бы его использовать именно для того, чтобы сказать одну простую мысль. Гражданское общество в России не умерло, оно существует. Оно включает в себя очень много людей.
I would like to say that I would like to also thank the regular Russian people who are now still in Russia, who are very numerous. There are thousands of them. They are still fighting. They are very active. They are campaigning against the war. They are fighting against Putin's regime and for democracy. Unfortunately, not always they are with us in the same halls, but because we have to get decentralized and organize our work. But I would like to really thank all of those who are now in Russia and they are still fighting. I know that I'm limited in time, but I would like to convey one simple idea. I want us to make sure that the civil society in Russia rests alive.
Да. Мы, как движение, всегда, в общем-то, верили в низовую активность, в низовое объединение и в силу гражданского общества именно на низовом уровне. И в течение этих 1,5 лет мы использовали все возможности для того, чтобы предоставить этому низовому, многоголосому, разному гражданскому обществу в России, которое до сих пор живо, возможности для протеста, возможности для агитации. И мы видели огромное количество людей, которые участвуют и в акциях, которые мы организовываем или помогаем проводить. Огромное количество людей участвует в агитации антивоенной и антипутинской. И здесь уже звучали некоторые оценки, сколько таких людей, сколько регионов и так далее. У нас есть свои оценки, они более оптимистичные. Например, только в нашем проекте по визуальной агитации, наглядной агитации против войны и режима участвовали как минимум 30 тысяч человек из 200 населенных пунктов российских. Мы точно знаем эти цифры, потому что они пользовались нашими диджитал-инструментами, ботами в Телеграме, присылали нам агитацию и так далее. Поэтому мы абсолютно точно знаем и хотим, чтобы вы тоже знали, что десятки тысяч людей в самых маленьких городах, в селах протестуют против режима. Они есть, их голос важен, они хотят свободы, они верят в свободу, они хотят демократии, они верят в демократию, они не хотят Путина. И мы, те, кто здесь, те, кто встречается на таких конференциях, конечно, не должны никогда исключать этих людей из уравнения, никогда забывать о них, в конце концов, и всегда помнить, что мы здесь от их имени, и мы должны действовать в их интересах, в интересах наших сограждан.
I would like to say that, yes, these grassroots activist movements are very important, and I know that they have been active, and we have been supporting them throughout these 18 months. We are trying to give voices to all these people and to show that in Russia there is a multitude of these voices who are still protesting, they are campaigning, and we need to support them. All of these peoples, they do protest in their small cities, in the regions. We have heard some statistics today. We have statistics of our own as well. For instance, within our visual tools visual tools for campaigning, we have registered 30,000 people who were representing approximately 200 different townships and towns and cities in Russia. They used our digital tools, our widgets, our Telegram bots, and we know that dozens of thousands of people do protest in Russia. They expressly demonstrate their will to fight the regime, to fight Putin's regime and system, and we should not forget them. We need to believe and see that we have to help them, and we need to represent their interests.
Действительно нужно отметить, что в последнее время протест, конечно, переживает период охлаждения, и это естественно, так всегда случается, никакой протест не длится бесконечно. Люди устают, люди выдыхаются и так далее. И, возможно, у некоторых возникает идея, что... И даже слышны, в общем-то, такие голоса в публичном дискурсе от известных людей о том, что гражданское общество мертво, на России можно поставить крест, заколотить ее досками, похоронить и забыть. Это не так. Эти люди не знают Россию, не имеют представления о том, какие люди ее населяют, к сожалению. Поэтому нам, конечно, сложно предсказать, как будет развиваться ситуация, какие новые точки станут триггерными. Кто-то говорит, что это будет выборы в 2024 году, кто-то говорит, что это, возможно, будет новая волна мобилизации, я больше в это верю. Но, опять же, хочу отметить, что люди в России остаются, люди в России готовы бороться. Нам нужно пользоваться этими возможностями разумно и не забывать про этих людей. И все.
Indeed, protests do cool down. Protests cannot last forever, and any protests does have its cycle just because people get tired. However, although some people in the public space openly say that the civil society in Russia is dead and we have to forget about it, no, I do not agree to that. These people just do not know Russia. They do not know people who populate Russia. And I don't know, there are different triggers that may work or not. For instance, some people say that these triggers will come with the elections in 2024 or with a new wave of mobilization. We do not know whether it will happen or not. But we should not forget the people who live in Russia. We have to use every opportunity to support them.
Thank you very much, Timofey. Our next speaker is Mariana Katsarova, who is a special UN special rapporteur on human rights in Russia. She now represents UN Human Rights Council. Mariana had a long and distinguished career as an activist, as a journalist in the beginning of her career. Then she worked for Human Rights Watch, for Amnesty International, and then in the UN system, where she worked on different issues, including trafficking, but also recently, after 2014, on Ukraine, where she led the monitoring mission. And then, even more recently, just before taking over this particular mission of being a special rapporteur on human rights in Russia, she worked on situation in Belarus for the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. So nobody in the UN system knows the situation better than Mariana. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm the voice of the international community. So thank you very much to Olga and Russie-Libertés, and thank you to Professor Maria Mendras, an old friend for many years. And thank you to Provost Sergei Guriev for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm literally here for one day because I think your conference and this gathering is extremely important today in Paris. I just want to say how honored I am to be in the presence of such brave, constantly brave, not just for a day or two, individuals and fighters and voices who haven't been silenced, human rights defenders, like my dear old comrade, Lev Ponomaryov, who is in the audience, and let's applaud them. And of course, my dear colleague and human rights defender, human rights lawyer, extremely brave, and also one of the 3 experts on the examination. It's an investigative mandate on Belarus, Karina Moskalenko. Here she is. And to my fellow participants on the panel, Vadim Prokhorov, who stood by so many political prisoners as a brave human rights lawyer, defense lawyers, to Evgenia, who turned into an activist after being and still being a mother of 3 when Vladimir Kara-Murza was speaking and being active and outside prison. And I think, listening to Evgenia, we should all agree she could be one of those future democratic political leaders of the Russian Federation. And thank you, Timofey. I haven't met you before, but I'm so excited to see these young activists in Russia, human rights activists, anti-war activists, or political future politicians who are so technological, unlike us from the older generation. But we need to learn, and they support our work. So thank you. I am privileged to be, it's a double privilege and a hard responsibility to have been appointed the first special rapporteur of the United Nations on the human rights situation in the Russian Federation. It's a role that would have not been possible in the previous period or many years ago. It really became possible because suddenly the world and the governments of the world, the members of the United Nations and the Europeans to begin with, has opened their eyes to all these repressions and persecutions and virtually closing the civic space in the Russian Federation. They have awoken after the armed attack, invasion of Ukraine last February by the Russian government and the Russian army. But this repression started much, much before this moment in time. As one ambassador put it, actually the Luxembourg ambassador, who are the pen holders of the creation of the resolution that created my mandate, he said, my report to the UN, which I presented my first report last week, actually managed to squeeze 20 years of repression into 20 pages. I take that as a huge compliment, because I think volumes could be written. My dear friend Anna Politkovskaya was killed 18 years ago. Somehow the skies opened in the cosmos, because the resolution that adopted the mandate on the Russian Federation was adopted by the governments by chance. Nobody timed it. You cannot time the UN delays and working methods of the Human Rights Council. It was adopted on 7th of October. It's the day of the murder of Anna Politkovskaya 18 years ago in Moscow, to silence her. And then many more were killed or persecuted. So the repression that we currently see, and it's, I agree with you, Vadim, that it very much resembles the Stalinist repressions. However, it's more sophisticated than that. People are not just sent to gulags in Siberia. Every opportunity is used, legislative or the administrative offenses code, the criminal offenses code. Any opportunity is used to actually silence any dissent, and particularly the one against the war on Ukraine. The Russian authorities have a sophisticated system, I think, of silencing these dissident voices, starting from of course, the anti-war expression on the internet. You can just be under scrutiny by the authorities and under persecution only because you have liked some article on the internet which speaks about the truth about the war on Ukraine or questions the invasion of Ukraine. Or you can be detained and then subjected to torture, including sexual violence, rape against anti-war protesters that I have documented in my report, against men and women by police in Russian custody, police custody, only because you protested, participated in a peaceful protest, peaceful demonstration against the war on Ukraine. My mandate was not allowed so far on the territory of the Russian Federation, and the Russian authorities are trying their best to to isolate my mandate and to ignore it, actively ignore it, by encouraging division within the UN special procedures. They recently sent a not verbal to all special rapporteurs saying that any communication from me individually or joined with other special rapporteurs would be ignored and they will not reply. Of course, this is an attempt to undermine the UN human rights system, which has been built for all these years, and that's not acceptable from any government, but particularly from an important country and a government that is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations and holds the power of a veto. So very often the Russian Federation is this important government that decides the peace or war, the life and death of many people around the world, because this is what the Security Council of the United Nations actually decides. And I think a country which is now running to become again a member of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, I'm not at liberty to comment on any country's applications. By the way, my own country, Bulgaria, is running against the Russian Federation for this seat. But I will say a question is logical. How can you not respect the rules of the UN Human Rights Council and try actively to prevent the work of the Special Rapporteur on Russia, and at the same time would like to join the Human Rights Council? It's a contradiction of terms. I won't go through my report with you. I think you already know. I heard a lot of Russian speakers when I was coming down. I know that you actively look and know what's happening in the Russian Federation. I have documented the grave situation with human rights, with the violation of the fundamental freedoms like freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly in the Russian Federation, the continuing torture and ill treatment of any dissenting voice, and especially the anti-war protesters, the silencing of human rights defenders, the closing down of more than 600 NGOs, human rights organizations. Virtually, there is no independent media in Russia, none. So, yes, it's a silence which has been meant and planned and strategically implemented by the Russian authorities. But I want to caution here a couple of things. I've been addressing governments until yesterday, actually, at the UN in Geneva. I requested meetings with all regional groups. So I met the African group, I met the Latin American, I met all sorts of different governments. And one thing that is very clear, what can we do, all of us, and each of us? Not all Russians are responsible for the aggression and for the invasion on Ukraine. And as a human rights expert, I do not believe, and international law does not believe either, in collective guilt. Collective guilt is an emotional term. Let's leave it for poets and for writers, I think, and for nationalist right-wingers who probably believe in that. But I think the guilty, the perpetrators for human rights violations, including for war crimes in Ukraine, have their names. They're individuals that have to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable through, and I agree with Vadim, through the international mechanisms. There is an investigation now by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. They have to be held in universal jurisdiction cases around the world, which is another tool of holding them responsible. And I think it's very important that we speak about it. I mean, it's interesting, in my hometown, Sofia, I was recently on the street speaking to Nobel Peace Prize winner and exiled leader of the opposition in Belarus and half Ukrainian, half Belarusian, Svetlana Alexievich, in Russian. And suddenly a fellow of mine, Bulgarian, was passing by on a bicycle. He saw that, heard that we were speaking in Russian. He turned around and spat all over us. And that's my compatriot. I'm ashamed for such behavior. I was also nearly attacked in Berlin when I was speaking Russian in a Greek restaurant. Thank God, all of the restaurants stood up to defend me and then looked at me, and I'm not typically Russian looking, and I said in English, safe, I said, actually I'm Bulgarian, but I stood up for the right of everybody to speak their language, and I just happen to speak Russian, and that's fine. And I think silently everybody agreed. The level of hatred against everything Russian and Russians, without making distinction between who is responsible and for the war, who is responsible for persecution, who is responsible for the human rights violations and the repression. And at the same time, we should give tribute, and it's not just emotional terms, but it's providing protection in our countries. And if there are French people here among the Russians, and please spread the word in France. Protection for the brave, protection, asylum for the human rights defenders, enabling their work, opening bank accounts. In many countries in the European Union, this is a problem if you're a Russian. If you're a Russian activist or human rights defender or a dissident, you cannot register a human rights organization to continue your work. And this is what a lot of Russian activists are doing. They're opening branches in Europe or in other countries where they're in exile. And I want particularly to pay attention to the brave men who are conscientious objectors and who refuse to participate in this war, and they claim their conscientious objection in Russia, but it's not honored by the military commissions. Several people challenged that in court in Russia, and Vadim, correct me, or Karina, I think one case only got a positive response. others not, because the authorities claim that conscientious objection to military service does not apply to the mobilization. But ladies and gentlemen, mobilization is not a human rights violation in any jurisdiction, because any government could mobilize us to go and fight their war. But there are always people that refuse to be part of these wars, and many of them are in Europe, many of them are abroad, seeking asylum or protection. I think we should put pressure on all these governments where these men refusing to fight in this war and refusing to kill others are asking for protection. They should be protected. Yeah. And in conclusion, I really think I want us all to reflect, and I want us to speak about it, to speak up. I know it's frightening to say that Russians could be brave, because many people think, oh, all Russians are guilty, all Russians are aggressors. And that reflects government policies. You know how difficult it is to get out of Russia. You can go via Turkish Airlines that exponentially have made their price on tickets as if they're punishing the Russian people who are trying to get out, or the Belarusian people. The Belarusian people who staged one of the most beautiful, peaceful revolutions in 2020. But what did European governments do? They denied the studentship of a lot of the young Belarusians, and then and visas, and then they had to return back to the hands of the government and to be imprisoned for their participation in the peaceful protest of 2020 in Belarus. I don't want to see this happening with Russians, anti-war protesters that are escaping rape and torture and imprisonment in Russia in order to continue their work abroad. So unite around the Russian human rights defenders. And I promise that my mandate is a voice, it's an amplifier of the voice of the human rights defenders and the victims of human rights violations from Russia, and of all Russians, because this mandate is an important tool to actually fight for the human rights of the own people, of the government, of the Russians. And we as foreigners can only speak and write and observe and stand up and say the truth of our observation. But it's the Russian people that have to own it, and they have to protect their Vladimir Kara-Murzas and Oleg Orlovs and the many others that have stood up for human rights and are paying the price. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The organizer of the session is our discussant, Marie Mandras, who works at Sciences Po at the Center for International Studies. Marie, you're a discussant of those interventions. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergei. I would like first to thank our friends, guests, and speakers here. It is wonderful that you could come, and it is so important because we need to hear your voices, because our voices here are only fully heard when your voice comes with our voices. Don't underestimate the fight that we still have to wage to get very simple things straight. In the media, in our media, and with say the political class, and more generally the French public, but it's the same in Germany and Italy and other countries. I would like to stress 3 points and then ask you a question before we open the floor to our audience. The first is what I felt was so important in what you said, and I felt very touched about it, is that the four of you, and Ilya as well, who spoke from his prison, what you have focused on mostly is people, human beings. And this is what I've been really struggling for since the very beginning of the war of aggression against Ukraine, is that I was asked all kinds of silly questions about strategy, security, would we antagonize further Putin, but what if we take Ukraine in, then don't we? And what about the army, how much? And nobody would ask me the very simple question: what does it mean for the population? And in actual fact, if you study wars and conflicts as I do, you see that always the target of war, humiliation, exactions, is the people. It's not so much the territory or warm seas or industry, or it is the people, and it's exactly what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, been happening in recent weeks and in the last 3 years. Exactly. The thing is to humiliate those people so much that they will effectively disappear from the face of the earth. They will hide themselves in Armenia or somewhere else. It's exactly what Putin wanted to do in Ukraine. But, the man is out of himself and out of his mind, and he had absolutely no idea what Ukraine means and what the 45 million people who live in Ukraine, who they are. They didn't count. It was just a map, porous borders, interests, oligarchs. This is what my intelligence tells me. This is what my spies tell me who are in Ukraine. And this is always what I tell my students. When you start studying a conflict, the first question you ask is people, population. And population is the first target of the dictator and invader. But it's also his greatest vulnerability. And this is exactly what the five of you have been telling us. People, societies, just will win. My second point is that I would like, after almost 20 months of war, to stress the amazing accomplishments of the Ukrainians, of course, but also of the Russians, and in particular Russian opposition, civil society, Viesna, Timofey's movement, the anti-war resistance, that actually is acting in almost every town and city of the Federation of Russia. And remember, Russia does not exist as a macro thing. It is a very vast federation. And you have a significant part of people who live in the Russian Federation that are not Russian, and that have been victims of Russian wars, like the Chechens. So let's stress the accomplishment, not only just in the last 2 years, but before, as Vadim and Yevgenia stressed, the Magnitsky List, thanks to Vladimir Karamurza and Boris Nemtsov and others. This is absolutely huge. What you've been doing, the Navalny Foundation, that continues to investigate and post podcast videos about the corruptions of the powerful in Russia and in other places. They continue to do it. I mean, they are a foreign agent. They are trying to to kill Alexei Navalny in prison with ill treatments, and they continue to work. They will never stop. And we are in contact with them all the time. You know, they are now, most of them, in exile. But it's so easy to communicate between Vilnius, Warsaw, Paris, and Washington. Let's continue to stress all those accomplishments. And please do acknowledge our accomplishments. Because yes, it's not enough, but we have done a lot. I mean, the solidarity of the European Union is way above, you know, the disputes between a few of the governments among themselves, or between the Poles and the Ukrainian. You have to see the extraordinary solidarity, and the same with NATO. It is important. It is important to see that we managed to do it, and that we do support Ukraine, and will continue to support Ukraine as much as you can. An accomplishment of what you do in building the archives of the dictatorship and the war. I remember Anna Politkovskaya, whom we knew very well with Mariana, and she came twice to speak at Sciences Po in the early 2000s. She would always tell me, Marie, what is important is always the fact, the evidence to build the archives of the war in Chechnya. Otherwise, you know, Putin can say it just never happened. So thanks to you, thanks to us, thanks to the Ukrainian prosecutors and very courageous people who on the ground gather all the evidence, have the list of all the killed and wounded, and you know, it's Vladimir Putin is under an international arrest warrant. That anybody who knows anything about what's happening thinks of Vladimir Vladimirovich as a war criminal, not anymore as the president of the Federation of Russia. So this is a major accomplishment. Finally, I would say that just reacting to Vadim's comment about the end of the war may not necessarily bring the end of the dictatorship. I can think of many cases where it does, and where it did in Europe. And so I would put aside, you know, Saddam Hussein, but I remember, I can think of many. But in the case of Russia, Ukraine, it's all happening in Europe. We know everything about this war, about the crimes. Putin is isolated. There is no powerful global south behind him. Only Iran is helping him with drones, and maybe North Korea, but who cares really? So I would like to ask the four of you, your vision, your opinion, your vision, on how the transition might happen, and how we can all together accompany this transition. And Vadim, you were so right to say it is now, and I think Timofey said it as well, and it is now that we prepare the post-war situation. And there, you have to go back to history. Think about, for better or worse, but the war conferences in 1943, 44, 45. The Allies together would already prepare how, so some things went very, very wrong, but if you take the case of Germany, things were right. And there was a Marshall Plan, and all this could happen because we required, and this is what the Ukrainian government is requiring, we require a total surrender of the Russian army. No condition, total surrender of the Russian army. And after the military surrender comes the political surrender, that is the surrender of the regime that claims to represent the state. And if this is the ideal goal, how can one prepare now for rebuilding Russia after Ukraine is liberated from troops and the Russian people are liberated from a corrupt and violent regime? And I would like to ask you more specifically, I mean, for about a year, I've been following quite a number of meetings and forums where you, the Russian democratic opposition, you meet and you start thinking about new legislation, new constitution, how to do it. I think it would be good if you would tell us where you are standing now and how you see the coming months. Thank you very much.
So who wants to go first? Evgenia, you were first. So you have an answer. You have an answer to Marie's question.
I wish. If I had an answer to Marie's question, would be already building a lovely democratic Russia. Well, that is an important question, and of course we need to ask ourselves what each and every one of us can do for that. Because if we only hope, yes, of course we hope. I have a lot of hope. I have a hope that I will see my husband again, alive and, well, relatively well. But I will make him well again, like I did after the 2 poisonings. So he will walk and talk, he use spoons and do everything he's supposed to do. I hope that my kids will see their father sooner rather than later, and I hope that they won't have to grow up without him. I hope that all these broken families will find their loved ones and will find a life in a peaceful and democratic Russia. I hope. But only hoping is not going to help. We understand that we need this hope to push us forward, to make us do something about it. So that's the important thing, to think about what each and every one of us can do. And it can be a very little thing, like sending a message of solidarity and support to a political prisoner by writing him or her a letter. There is the Всім письмо. You can physically write a letter, a postcard, and send it. Those addresses of political prisoners are easily found. So that is, maybe it's a small thing, but it's a huge thing for those behind bars, because it is their connection to the world outside, and it's also giving them hope. Because, I have this, for several weeks already, I have this absolutely atrocious story in my head, and I go around telling it to everyone, the story of Anatoly Berezikov, a Russian musician turned activist in Rostov-on-Don. He was arrested for putting up flyers of the Ukrainian project, I Want to Live. He was detained, thrown in a detention center, repeatedly beaten up. And one morning, when his lawyer came to visit him in that detention center, she saw his body being carried out. She has the pictures of the traces of the electroshock used on him, and she believes that he was tortured to death. During his trial, Anatoly Berezikov repeated several times that he was afraid to just disappear and be forgotten. And I want to make sure that the story of this brave man lives on. I want to make sure that his courage lives on, because he also wanted to live. He was 40, the same year, the same age as Vladimir and I. So yes, giving hope to these people behind bars is a huge thing to them. Do that. And I'm not I'm not a politician, even though Madam Special Rapporteur believes I might have a future in politics. I still try to. I believe that our family already has one brilliant politician, and one brilliant politician per family is enough. So I'm not going to give you any programs for tomorrow's Russia, although I do, of course, have an idea of what I want to see in my country. I want it to actually become a federation, not just on paper. I want it to be a parliamentary republic, because we've seen it over and over again that in Russia, giving power to one person doesn't work out well. It should not be. We don't want to replace a bad czar with a good one. We need a parliamentary republic with a parliament that will actually be a place for discussion, and that will actually represent those 145 million people living in 11 time zones, those 190-something peoples and ethnicities living on this huge territory. That's what we need. But again, I don't have a program. It's up to 4 politicians to write it. But I want to mention one important thing. And just before Vladimir was sent on this transfer to the strict regime, maximum, security prison colony in Siberia, we were able to get his article out of the Moscow detention center and get it published by the Echo of Moscow radio station, and a translation by the Washington Post. And I believe that in this article, Vladimir talks about something very important to all of us Russians as a nation, to all of us Russian citizens. So, and if you will permit, I'll read a bit of it. A society that has gone through the trauma of a brutal dictatorship, massive internal repressions, and aggressive external wars, that has lived for decades under conditions of total lies and deliberate distortion of normal human values, needs above all moral purification. This is the path that, in various forms, but with an unchanged essence, a variety of countries have walked in recent history, from Germany after National Socialism to the states of Latin America after military dictatorships, from the former socialist countries of Eastern Europe to post-apartheid South Africa. To prevent the return of evil, we must first comprehend, condemn, and punish it, publicly and at the highest state level. In this way, neither the ideology underlying the previous regime nor the structures and people implementing its repressive policy will be allowed to harm the young democracy, especially in the first, most important years of its formation. I'm sorry, that's a long article, and I'm trying to find the right thing. This path of real renewal was open to Russia in 1991 and 1992. Society was ready for it. As we know, nothing of the sort was done. Yeltsin was not ready for a final break with the Soviet past. Western leaders, afraid of being confronted with interesting information about themselves in the Moscow archives, pressured Yeltsin to keep them closed. The Supreme Soviet did not even consider Starovoytova's bill, and the Constitutional Court made a half-hearted decision that avoided the main issue, the illegality of the activities of the CPSU itself. No official conclusions were made regarding those punitive bodies. The archives, for the most part, remained closed. The KGB dodged even the mildest of reforms. It received a bit of an image makeover, that was all. And the people who took a direct part in repression ended up in leadership positions from the very first day of democratic Russia. In December 1991, Vyacheslav Lebedev, who had recently taken part in the imposing of sentences for political reasons, was confirmed as the chairman of the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation. In January 1992, the post of head of the Anti-Corruption Department of the Ministry of Security of the Russian Federation was given to Anatoly Trofimov, who, as a KGB investigator, handled the cases of many Moscow dissidents, including Anatoly Shiransky, Yuri Orlov, Sergei Kovalov, and Father Gleb Yakunin. Soon, Trofimov rose to the position of head of the Moscow department of the FSB and deputy head of the entire organization. There are many similar examples, but I will name only one more. In the same year, 1992, KGB officer Vladimir Putin, who in the 1970s had personally taken part in searches and interrogations of Leningrad dissidents, became the right-hand man of St. Petersburg Mayor Anatoly Sobchak. We have no right to repeat this mistake when the window of opportunity opens again. All archives must be opened and published. All the crimes of both the Soviet and Putin regimes must receive a proper evaluation at the state level. All structures involved in these crimes, above all the FSB, must be liquidated, and the people who committed these crimes must be held accountable before the law. Those who served as conductors of repressive policies should be deprived of the right to hold government posts. And this will not be a witch hunt, as some current officials will once again shout, but the necessary protection against a new authoritarian revenge. And I would like to emphasize, although it goes without saying, to investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Putin regime in the course of its aggression against Ukraine, we will have to create an international tribunal modeled on similar ones for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, to which all suspects, regardless of their rank and position, must be transferred. Only in this way, having fully confronted and condemned these crimes, will Russia be able to truly free itself from the burden of the past and move forward toward the creation of a free and modern state based on law and universal values. This will ensure that the country can finally avoid entering the same old vicious circle, so that the next generation of Russian politicians will no longer need to conduct the same old discussions between Vladimir labor camp and Moscow prison. So I believe that this is something that will absolutely have to be done so that we don't keep walking this vicious circle time and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. I highly recommend to read this article in its entirety, because it does provide answers to Marie's questions, to all Marie's questions. I now think we still have 20 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. We have microphones. There is a question here. You can walk to the microphone and ask a question here. Yeah. Please introduce yourself and say for whom you want to answer your question.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Timofey Protest, and I'm currently from Portugal, originally from Moscow. And thank you for making this interesting conference. And I know that there are many activists here who make protests around the world. They are from Russia, and they bring Russians to protest. And as Timofey said, interest to protests getting lower, and we need bring value and meaningful to protests. So I would like to ask for your expert advice on how to bring more value and how to explain this value to people from Russia that they should go to the street and protest. And for example, we support various political forces with protests, and we can support some idea. This is for you to we need your help to bring value to our protests. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a question for Timofey. No?
Мне кажется, у меня есть ответ, который заодно отвечает и на вопрос модератора. Мне кажется, что важно сосредоточиться в том числе на том, что протест как навык важен для будущей России в том числе. как и прочие гражданские навыки. Мне кажется, что перед нами и перед диаспорой, и перед теми активистами, которые остаются в России, есть задача не только думать о том, как демонтировать диктатуру, как построить институты, но и задача, проблема, как развивать гражданское общество в России. Мне кажется, что это тоже неотделимый элемент успеха и построения устойчивой демократии в России. Она, на мой взгляд, невозможна без гражданского общества. И, конечно, нам, оппозиционным организациям, которые еще работают, необходимо каким-либо образом помогать людям становиться активными, вовлекаться в протест, нарабатывать навыки. Это могут быть самые мелкие гражданские навыки, написание обращений, писем европейским чиновникам, российским чиновникам. Это могут быть пикеты, митинги. В общем, есть целый спектр гражданских активностей. Это участие в выборах, голосование и так далее. Поэтому в этом заключается ценность протеста. Это легко сказать, но сложно зачастую объяснить людям, преодолеть апатию, усталость и так далее. Но это очень важная мысль, которую, на мой взгляд, нужно держать в голове и доносить до людей. И самим помнить о том, что важно сохранять и развивать гражданские навыки.
I think it is very important to concentrate on the protests and the skills that we need to develop as a civil society. It is very important to discuss this within our diasporas and in Russia, because in order to dismantle the dictatorship and build all the institutions, we need to have these skills in order to be able to, in order to know how to develop the stable democracy, and it is impossible to build a civil society without that. And of course, the organizations, the active organizations that are within the opposition need to help simple people to acquire these skills, such simple skills at times as writing letters, writing applications, running campaigns, and just simply attending elections and so on. So I think that is the intrinsic value of a protest, to know how to do that, how to just become active, not to simply be saying things, but do something, overcome the fatigue and apathy, and finally commit what is supposed to be done.
I suggest we take 3 questions at a time. Go ahead.
Hi, hello. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul. I'm from Texas, the U.S. Since this war started around 2 years ago, the general trend seems to be Ukraine is gradually taking back its land. Some of that has happened in bunches, but a lot of it has been sort of slow, attritional warfare, sort of hand-to-hand combat for a few feet of land. If that, and that's come at a terrible cost, but if that continues, if that big picture continues, and Putin is backed into a corner, how do you think he responds? And if he calls for maybe a full mobilization, how does Russian society respond to that? Will there be opposition, or will Putin sort of stay in control? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Second question.
Hello, thank you for delivering the speech this evening. My name is Veronica, and I'm originally from Moscow, and now I'm a Sciences Po student in European Affairs. And I would be interested to know your opinion about what specifically the Europeans can do to bring back the peace on the European continent. Thank you.
I thought we teach you that. I thought you have that answer. Yeah. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Priest Valerian. I am activist of the movement which is called Mir Всем. It's a movement to protect...
Speak up, please, a bit. Speak up.
Speak to the microphone.
It's a movement to protect priests and clergy in Russia who are punished for their anti-war position. And my question is, like, when we're talking about having, supporting of the political prisoners in Russia, or making some humanitarian movements in Russia, there is a natural power, which is like Christian community and church, which is unfortunately discredited now in Russia because of many high bishops and positions in Russia are supporting the war. However, as we all say, Russia is not Putin, and also Orthodox Church is not Patriarch Kirill. Yeah? So basically there are a lot of people in church who are supporting political prisoners, who are supporting anti-war things, and maybe there is a way how to have a joint efforts between the opposition leaders and opposition efforts to help political prisoners in Russia and church people who are against the war. And maybe you have some thoughts, maybe especially Evgenia, how to build this link and how to use this network of humanitarian and peaceful people in Russia to support political prisoners and support the civil activities against the war in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to answer one of two or three of those questions? What happens if Putin announces full mobilization? Да, давайте.
У меня есть некоторый опыт с мобилизацией, в том смысле, что когда была первая волна, весна объявляла акции протеста, и люди выходили, наш опыт говорит о том, что мобилизация это очень сильный триггер. И, как я уже раньше упомянул, мне кажется, что это даже гораздо более сильный протестный триггер, чем не выборы 2024 года. Это видно не только по тому, как реагируют активные оппозиционные люди в столицах, это также видно по реакции в регионах. И как справедливо, кстати, отмечал Илья Яшин в одном из своих писем, что там, где были протесты против мобилизации, она прошла лучше, в том смысле, что было меньше насилия и меньше в целом людей призвали. В регионах, например, люди тоже протестуют, как умеют зачастую. Есть такой жанр, как видеообращения, которые зачастую игнорируются и не очень популярны в российской оппозиции, но таких видеообращений от родственников, жен, матерей мобилизованных было огромное количество. Они же выходят в пикеты, они же пишут обращения к чиновникам и так далее. И некоторые из них добиваются успеха, добиваются того, что людей возвращают с фронта, незаконно мобилизованных, и законно мобилизованных и так далее. То есть протест есть, и он гораздо шире, чем оппозиционный протест. Он не такой протест, к которому привыкли мы. Зачастую это не уличная акция, другие формы протеста. Но он есть. Видно, что людей это волнует. Видно это по опросам, по социологии, о том, что люди начали больше тревожиться элементарно. И мобилизация затронула очень большое количество человек, больше, кажется, были разные тоже социологические данные, что больше 50% имеют знакомых, друзей, родственников, которых затронула мобилизация. И власти, кажется, старательно ее избегают. Сложно сказать, будет она или нет, но мое убеждение заключается в том, что ответ на нее, конечно, будет как минимум раздражение, как максимум активный протест. Это тоже сложно предсказать, но для этого есть все предпосылки.
I would like to share my experience of mobilization, at least of the first wave of the mobilization, because back in the time, Vesna announced an anti-war campaign, and people did rise, they did come out to the streets, and I think that, yes, we did experience this mobilization, and it is a significant and very strong trigger, a stronger one compared to, for instance, elections of or non-elections of 2024. And this it has to be viewed not only from the point of view of what's happening in the capitals, but also from the point of view of the regions and what is happening there. For instance, Ilya Yashin noted that the protests that in the regions where protests did happen, mobilization results, if we may put it so, were sort of better because fewer people were enlisted and drafted, and the situation was more peaceful. In the regions where people do protest, for instance, they do such simple things at times as recording a video address wives and friends of those who are drafted. They appeal to officials and record these videos, and as a result, people do come back from the battlefield. They do come back to their cities. So the protest exists. Maybe it is wider compared to what we can think of talking about protest. It is not always in the streets, but it is there, and people are concerned. The mobilization did touch lots of people, and according to some surveys, approximately 50% of all the population of Russia knows someone who was touched by the mobilization. So I think that we need to indeed resist and not take the situation for granted, and we need to support this protest.
Yes. First of all, thank you to Father Valeri, I think, yeah. And I would very much like to hear from you, if possible, with information about concrete cases of priests and religious leaders that are persecuted for anti-war stance or for any unorthodox views. Or orthodox views. Just playing with words, but I'm not sure which way. But yes, please. I want to hear. I also want to say that my mandate, there has been a lot of calls, and I'm absolutely convinced of that. I will be looking into the plight of Ukrainian civilians in detention in the Russian Federation, which is extremely important. I think Russia is a country at war, and we cannot ignore, when talking about the human rights of the Russians, the Russian population, the fact that there are thousands of Ukrainian civilians that have been detained, virtually kidnapped in the occupied territories of Ukraine and brought in detention in Russia. I will not be looking at the moment at the issue of the kidnapped children, because I think it's very important that the prosecutor of the ICC do their job, and it's a serious job, a prosecutorial investigation. And the second reason is because, as you know, any adoptions in any country, but in Russia as well, and a lot of these children has been adopted, is a confidential procedure. So if I am consulting Russian civil society, that means they will be endangered, and lawyers as well, family lawyers, for example, being involved in digging around about the deported children. So I think it's important we trust the International Criminal Court with that. I just wanted to mention one thing. I am listening to all these questions and answers, and I'm thinking, I just remember the words of Sergei Dovlatov, who said, "You're now all cursing Comrade Stalin for the 30 million who perished in the Gulag, but who wrote the 5 million denunciations, donosy?" And I think I'm not so optimistic about democratic Russia. I'm sorry, Evgenia. I'm not optimistic because I think we did see a peak to a future leader was Mr. Prigozhin. And I think that was a very scary moment in time for all of us who know Russia for many years. But I want to say it's a system. I grew up in communist Bulgaria. I know it's a totalitarian system where it happened, you know, through times. It happened in France as well, I think, through different historical times, where neighbors are reporting on neighbors, because that would bring you status or privilege, or you will be all right with the authorities. And it's about people. And I think we need to be, somebody was asking about protests and how to encourage more protests in Russia. I always say, I'm very scared of people who are not afraid. I mean, if somebody is not afraid, I mean, I am afraid. Anna Politkovskaya was afraid. She was telling me that. Normal people have a normal reaction of being afraid. So these kind of heroic people that are not afraid, they're either extraordinary or really aliens. I don't think... I agree with the Russian people who are afraid. And I think the most important thing, I often said through my human rights career to lawyers, who are representing human rights defenders on hunger strike. I said, please tell them to stop. Nobody would benefit from them being with a ruined health, with a ruined everything. Not the government, not the president. They will just perish due to this hunger strike. We need to be strong to survive in the long term, because human rights and freedom and democracy is not about an individual act, although we've seen so many brave acts, like Oleg Orlov with individual picket on the first day of the war, with Svetlana Ganushkina with this poster, Stop the War in Ukraine. And on 11th of October, we're expecting Oleg Orlov, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Memorial co-chair, to actually receive a prison term. And he does not want to leave the country. And of course, there is, I'm not Russian, but there is some, you know, in the best of Russians, this, you know, selflessness of sacrifice for the people, which maybe is in the best of all people in the world that hold the light for all of us. But still, it's normal to be afraid to receive 15 years imprisonment or 25 like Vladimir. But what's important for us, in order to encourage Russians to know, to understand, and everybody else, is to hold to the truth. Because we live in times where truth is the kind of most expensive commodity. It's bombarded by propaganda in Russia, by the government. We need to counteract that propaganda. And when, for example, the government is saying, I was speaking to the governments yesterday, and actually the Western group of governments, when the Russian government propaganda says to the citizens of Russia, look, the West, the collective West hates you, hates us all, because they don't give you visa, they don't give you flights, and don't care about you. But we do care. We're the ones that care about you. We're the only ones. There is some truth into this propaganda. And this is why I was talking to the Western governments. Well, counter this propaganda. First of all, send to the Russian people messages of solidarity with them. And also give them visas, give visas to the human rights defenders, distinguish who is a government official, who is a perpetrator, and who is an activist, anti-war person. I see these television, you know, independent ones or Radio Liberty go and interview people on the street in Russia. Of course they won't say, I'm against the war and I'm with Ukraine. Of course they won't. I mean, I didn't during my totalitarian upbringing. Yes, then I joined the first opposition newspaper in my country in '89, but it was the perestroika in the Soviet Union was happening and we were leading Aganyok and all these things, so there was hope. But no, I don't think it was a failure by the Russian people not to have democratic transition. It wasn't a failure in Eastern Europe. I actually think the Western governments and our Western partners have something to learn from that. Because they came to our countries and they were interested in those who speak English, who know how to eat with, you know, fork and knife and be civilized, because we were these behind the Iron Curtain savages. And nobody spoke English. Actually, those who spoke English in the Russian human rights movement, we thought they were spies. Because why did you, I to this day think some of them who spoke English 30 years ago were not quite clean. But you know what? The responsibility is about how do you build bridges to a country which is coming out of totalitarian past. You don't go to do business to them and promote free market economy only. And here is Mr. Guriev, who is a guru on economy. I'm nobody, I'm a human rights activist and special rapporteur, but I believe we wanted this change for the democracy. We wanted this change for human rights in Eastern Europe. And what we received are divisions of poor and rich, of people mistrusting this change that continues for 30 years. And the same with the Russian people. I don't think the Russian people had, not for a second, a moment in this transition where they were in power to actually decide anything. And Vladimir wasn't in power either. And I don't think the Russians should blame their past and lost opportunities, but think about the future and not dreaming about this democratic Russia, because it's not happening anytime soon. As any logical observer would tell you, it will get darker before it gets light. But you're the ones that could carry the light. There are a lot of young faces here. You will see it one day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariana. In Sciences Po, we start things on time. We not necessarily finish things on time, and Marie gave me a mandate for quick questions. So I suggest we do the following. We have 8 people who want to ask questions. They will ask questions, and then the panelists will choose which questions to answer. I feel responsibility, though, and especially so since Mariana called me a guru, to respond to the question to Veronica what the EU should do. And in addition to giving passports to Russia and so on, to restore peace, you need to win this war. This is a hot war which is won by soldiers on the ground, and EU should provide weapons and munitions to Ukrainian army, much more than today. And the second thing that the EU should, do, you should tighten up the sanctions, both reducing Russian oil revenues and Russia's ability to circumvent the existing sanctions and import weapons and dual-purpose goods. So let's ask quick questions.
Okay, my name is Jim Burke. I'm a longtime resident of the Paris region. In part, the speaker just answered my question. It's a difficult question, I think, for a Russian. Thousands of people have died in Ukraine. Thousands of Russian soldiers have died in Ukraine. Should NATO and other allies continue to furnish arms, and should they increase the quality and types of arms they're furnishing? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Good evening. My name is Sergei Patsitnik. I'm an independent journalist from Russia. I have a criminal case for spreading spreading fakes about Russian army. So I have a question. A lot of people, some number of people, are trapped now in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia because they have criminal cases, but they have not got travel documents, and Russia would not give them the travel passport. So I think it's the question for Mariana Katsarova or Evgenia Karamurza as advocacy coordinator, what we can do for them, or what you can do for these people who are trapped now in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergei.
Good evening. My name is Yana Brednikova. Now the world faces the issue connected. Now the world face the issue connected with implementing sanctions against the allies of Putin, and achieving this goal on seizing their actives abroad sometimes requires some changes in law of national governments of European countries. Is it legitimate for Russians to demand these changes? From your point of view, are Russians even capable of making a meaningful impact in this, or it's just business of national governments?
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening. I'm sorry I have 2 questions, but I'll try to be as fast as possible. My name is Cyril. I'm half Russian, half French. Lived in Ukraine for 12 years, and I'm a war reporter. My first question would be to Madame Karamurza. And I'm sorry, my questions are pretty challenging, but I think they are important as well to hear for people that are from Russia and that care about what is happening in the country right now. So obviously, your husband, unfortunately, right now is in jail. We know that other activists like Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin are in jail as well. But let's be honest, we didn't see a massive reaction from the population in terms of huge protests. We didn't see mass strikes or anything when it happens to that. We saw massive reactions from abroad, in countries like France, in the UK, in other countries. So my question is, do you believe, in a sense, and it is a tough question, I understand, that Russia, the society of Russia today, deserves politicians like your husband? And my second question would be to Timofey Martinenko. You mentioned different protests. You mentioned the protests where people take a video, for example, and they address the nation, the president. You mentioned as well protests, or maybe you didn't mention them, but I know that Vesna does that, puts numbers, for example, on walls, 15 and free, 15 for N and free for V, нет войне, no to war. But do you see a real effect when it comes to these actions? And also, what do you believe is needed today in Russian society to see a real change so that this war ends and that this regime ends as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nadezhda, and I have a question about what the political position of Russia inside and outside the country should be doing to get ready for the presidential elections in Russia next year, especially given the ongoing disputes between some of the most influential online political forces, which are the Navalny team and Maxim Katz, who are disputing for many, many weeks between themselves. What do you think?
Thank you, Nadezhda. Next question.
Hello, I'm Sergey. I've been living in France since late 1990. It was still the USSR when my parents immigrated. The main focus of this panel has been who and how will fix Russia. The Marshall Plan has been mentioned as the ideal post-war scenario, and that's because it is rightly deemed that Russia is the one country that went wrong and started an all-out war. But what about the many loopholes and weaknesses of Western institutions that have been visible, that have allowed the war and keep enabling it? I'm thinking of supplies that enable Russia's weapon manufacturing, also about the UN's role and how it can only do so much when a major nuclear power goes to war. Do you, members of this panel, have plans or hopes about who and how may try and fix that, so that war enabling by the West becomes less of a thing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna, and my question will actually be a small adding to the previous one concerning those Russians, anti-war Russians, who left to the countries like Kazakhstan or Armenia, or like several neighbor countries without foreign passports to go further. I would also like to add that there are another examples of Russians without EU visas or without chances to get humanitarian visas, and more than 100,000 of such anti-war Russians are now living in Serbia. And I'm nearly sure that 99% of people here didn't heard about recent cases about proclaiming Russian anti-war activists to be a national threat in Serbia for national security there. So my question is actually about different levels of vulnerable anti-war Russian activists who are living not only in countries where they, from which they can be returned to Russia, but in countries like Serbia, where the regime is, how to say, not brave enough to say we are strongly standing with Ukraine, like in EU, but still there are thousands of Russians who are actually ready to go to the streets, to the peaceful protests, to fundraise, to support Ukraine, etc. But they are facing risks to be proclaimed a national threat and to stay without any legal grounds to stay. So what will be your advice to activist organizations there and to regular activists there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the very last question.
Yes, hello. I would like to everybody who records at the moment to stop recording. It's for safety reasons. Thank you very much. So I represent In Transit. We're helping political prisoners, those who are under political persecution to escape. We're working with humanitarian visas, with ersatz passports, and so on. So I would like also to answer the questions that were a couple of times asked here from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. Well, from Kazakhstan and Armenia, there are two ways to go if you don't have a passport, foreign passport. Yeah, it's only France and Germany at the moment can help these people. They give, together with humanitarian visa, France can give laissez-passer, and Germany can give, together with humanitarian visa, ersatz passport. From Kyrgyzstan, the only possibility is Germany. With the ersatz passport, but at the moment what we see is actually a catastrophe. We're working already since the beginning of the war, so we know the process of humanitarian visas, but at the moment it's really a catastrophe because they are, the speed, the time of waiting for the visa is enormous, at least for the German one. And people don't have support. I generally would like to speak about, we have a feeling like of kind of a pretty bad management of anti-war resistance. People are pretty alone, with their waiting for visa, support that they try to get in transit countries, long. When I say long, it means it can be 7 months, 8 months, 1 year, waiting for humanitarian visa, which was supposed to be, rapid way of help. And when we talk about advocacy, there are initiatives that work a lot on advocacy, but we really need your help and to work together with us, because we are talking with, in Germany with Auswärtiges Amt, with BMI, with Ministry of Inner Affairs. And as we know, I mean, the most problems or where we need your help and advocacy is with Ministry of Inner Affairs. And we would like to ask you to work together with us, with those who help to evacuate people, with those who help them to get visas, because we have also information. But we really need to work together, I think. And again, about like pretty bad management of the whole situation, we have to say that, you know, Vivajuk that are evacuating people in transit and the others are still working for free, like since 1.5 years and don't get support. So the situation that we see at the moment really needs urgent, it's only on the surface the humanitarian visas are given, in reality not. About deserters, the same situation. They also need support and they need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are already over by 13 minutes, so suggest that every speaker chooses whether to answer one of those questions, and if yes, then very quickly. We start with Vadim, then Mariana, then Evgenia, then Timothy.
I think that the no doubt, most important questions is about the race of transit, of transfer from Kyrgyzstan, from Kazakhstan, and other ex-Soviet republics, or just now there is only one of the very few places in the world as the asylum for our refugees, political refugees and social activists and so on and so on. It's a very, very important question. No doubt, maybe just now it's one of the most important questions for all our refugees and for our society, community abroad. I think it is necessary to come to any decisions, maybe some kind of laissez-passer passports, some kind of the same of nonsense passport and so on. And just now, I think that we have to be thankful to the German and French governments which pay attention to this problem and know that sometimes it's possible to take visas, humanitarian visas and other types of visas. But anyway, we could discuss this problem for a long period and for many hours, but I think that it's no doubt one of the most important and relevant questions and tasks for us just now.
Thank you, Vadim.
Yes, on the question of people that are stuck in various countries, yes, Serbia was mentioned as well. I could imagine, but why would these people go to Serbia is another good question. Or they just could go there. I mean, maybe it's good to give advice in the meantime to where people are getting themselves. I think it's important to, as civil society, what could be done. On one level, money is needed. Money should be collected, I suppose that's what I heard, for legal representation, for these organizations, support the civil society organizations in your country, in France, who are able to take up, lawyers who are able to take these cases up. Also, in terms of advocacy, I would say contact civil society in Germany as well, or in these countries where these people are, and try to advocate, especially if it's European Union, there is European Parliament. Who are your parliamentarians? Have you written to them? Write to them, raise the cases. And also to your government to actually have some bilateral talks to these governments where the Russian asylum seekers are or of need of protection. I think, Amnesty International, the other FEDH, the other human rights organizations, but also the Russian ones like Memorial, there is Memorial now in France. I think you need to get together with them and just discuss it, discuss strategies for protection. I won't be able, through my mandate, to take up every case of a person around the world, Russian, and it's not my role. My role is actually human rights violations within the internationally recognized borders of Russia, and any expulsions from Russia, like I've been taking cases of Belarusian peaceful demonstrators and so forth. being threatened to be returned back to Belarus. But I think you have to mobilize and make your own strategies as civil society. Yeah. Yeah. And just to say, if it's unsafe for you to actually speak publicly, don't speak publicly. There are other means of speaking. It's important. Please take it to heart. Because I'm sure even in this gathering, when it was full, there was probably people not like-minded. Right. It's always like that.
They've left. You've seen they've left.
They've left.
And thank you very much for your patience, those who stayed. Evgenia.
Well, I will try to answer the question about the lack of mass protests in the Russian Federation. Well, President Ronald Reagan said in his Westminster speech that it would be cultural condescension, or worse, to say that any people would choose dictatorship over democracy. No one wants to live in poverty. No one wants to have his or her rights violated. No one wants to run the risk of being thrown in prison for standing in the street with a blank sheet of paper or with a copy of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. The fact is that thanks to the engagement of independent journalists, many human rights organizations, governments, and independent observers, it is possible to collect and document information and proofs of war crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine. And this is absolutely crucial information for the work of the International Tribunal to prosecute those responsible for the crime of aggression and for war crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine. In Russia, the situation is slightly different. In the absence of any democratic instrument to assess the state of mind of Russian citizens, there is no free elections, no freedom of speech, no freedom of assembly, no freedom of association, no free media, nothing. Every organization that has to do with human rights is being declared as undesirable or foreign agent. My husband, yes, has it all, the entire arsenal. You know, he was accused of spreading knowingly false information. He was declared a foreign agent. He was accused of cooperating with the undesirable organization. And to top it all, high treason. But he's not alone. And the fact is that in the absence of those democratic instruments, we have a very vague idea of the scale of repression inside the country. Yes, there are no mass protests, but arrests and detentions happen on a daily basis, according to human rights organizations and people, absolutely courageous people like Timofey here, who still work on the ground. So this is why the work of the UN Special Rapporteur is so important to us. The work at PACE Special Rapporteur on the situation in Russia. The work of OSCE-PA Special Representative on Political Prisoners, because these people help us document these cases, put them on paper so that we one day might have our own tribunal to bring those responsible for human rights, for the violations of human rights in Russia, to accountability. And there's one little thing. I want to respond to the skepticism of the special rapporteur. I have to, in the words of great US statesman John McCain, Senator John McCain, courage is not the absence of fear, but our capacity to act despite our fears. And I believe that, truly. Those people who go out in the streets, they do have fears. They are scared, I'm sure. And I'm sure that my husband was scared to go back to the country where they tried to kill him twice. It's not about the absence of fear. It's about understanding that there is something more important, that you stand up for something so huge that it sometimes feels like it's bigger than your life. And it truly is. And if we're skeptical about Russia's prospects, Russia's democratic prospects, then we can all pack up and go. The fact is, we cannot afford being pessimistic about Russia's prospects. We cannot afford being skeptical. We need to work toward it because the key to peace and stability on the continent is a democratic Russia. For as long as there's going to be any kind of autocratic regime there, war will continue and Russia will continue being a threat to itself and its neighbors. So now we have to do everything we can to change Russia so that it stops being a threat to itself and everyone around. Thank you.
You're a true politician, Evgenia.
Just before giving floor to Timothy, I would like to mention a number. This is a number which is coming from over the info. We think that about more than 20,000 people have been detained protesting against this war in Russia. And then when we say that people don't protest in Russia today, we should listen to Mariana and compare Russia to Belarus. Nobody is protesting in Belarus today. Do we think that Belarusians support the regime? No, we've seen them protesting. They don't protest today for the reason that repression is much harsher today. And whenever people talk about Russia, they always analytically compare Russian trajectory with Belarusian trajectory, saying that what's happening in Russia today happened in Belarus a couple of years before. That unfortunately brings us to this unfortunate forecast about what's going to happen in Russia soon, unless Putin is removed. So in that sense, I think we should not believe Russian propaganda that Russians support Putin wholeheartedly. Timothy? Go ahead.
Да, спасибо. Я, пожалуй, отвечу на тот вопрос, который был адресован мне. Во-первых, я бы хотел добавить, что раз уж мы перешли к некродискуссиям, я бы хотел высказать в очередной раз то, что я уже много раз говорил. Мне кажется, это мое глубокое убеждение, соглашусь с коллегами, и заключается оно в том, что в тех условиях диктатуры, репрессий, социальных условиях высокой атомизированности российского общества, высокого недоверия в российском обществе и так далее, российские граждане протестовали отважнее, мощнее и лучше вообще, чем можно было бы ожидать от людей в такой ситуации. Это мое искреннее убеждение, я хочу, чтобы это прозвучало. Теперь к вопросу об эффективности протестов. Я уже упомянул Илью Яшина, который говорил о том, что там, где были протесты против мобилизации, мобилизация прошла мягче. Тут надо уточнить, что когда мы говорим о протестах, агитации, граффити, листовках и так далее, нужно понимать, что нам очень сложно измерить их эффективность. У нас нет инструментов, мы находимся в диктатуре, у нас нет независимой социологии, очень сложно, в принципе, проследить, сколько человек убедило граффити «нет войне», например. Но мы видим некоторые косвенные признаки. Если вы думали, что граффити может остановить войну, или листовки, или пикеты, то нет, не могут. Но мы видим косвенные признаки, что это оказывает влияние. Это очевидно убеждает какое-то количество людей. Это очевидно создает рычаги давления на власти, которые видят проявление недовольства. У них тоже вообще-то отсутствует объективная информация о том, что думает российское общество, и чего оно хочет, чего оно боится и так далее. У них есть ВЦИОМовские опросы. Да? Поэтому граффити и вся прочая вот эта как будто бы детская история, да, создает рычаги влияния, которые оказывают эффект и уменьшают последствия войны в российском обществе, препятствуют усугублению ситуации настолько, насколько это возможно. Это то, чем мы сейчас располагаем, и у нас нет серебряной пули, чтобы убить Путина. Извините. Спасибо.
So I would like to add, and as we're passing to discussion, I would like to repeat something that has already been said by my colleagues, and here, well, I'm strongly convinced that indeed protests are happening, even in the situation that we observe in our society. There is dictatorships, there are repressions, the society is hugely atomized, there is the situation of mistrust, but nevertheless, there are big numbers of strong and courageous people, much more than we hoped for, and I think that it is important that I voice this fact. Secondly, I think that protests do have their effects, and Mr. Yashin, Ilya Yashin, has mentioned various forms that they take, even though these forms might be viewed as minor or not that large scale, like these are, but still there are campaigns, there are leaflets, there are graffitis, and indeed, it is very difficult to monitor the real effect of these protests because it is difficult to count the number of people who drew those graffitis. Nevertheless, we do observe these indirect signs that protests are happening, and yes, this indeed helps to build up pressure and to put pressure on those in power, although they of course fight back because they also have their official surveys. So I think that even such simple thing as graffitis does have its effect, and it does influence the situation. It is also a form of protest. Unfortunately, we don't have a silver bullet to kill Putin right away. Sorry, but yes, that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Since nobody has taken Jim's question, let me answer the question. It's not thousands of Ukrainians and thousands of Russians who've died. It's at least tens of thousands on each side, and maybe more. The question, as I understand it, should have what would have happened if NATO did not provide weapons to Ukraine? And the answer is very simple. What we've observed in Bucha, we would have observed in Zaporizhzhia and Kiev. That's that simple. I think Mr. Putin's goal was very clear. He wanted to dismember Ukraine and occupy at least a large part of Ukraine, which he now doesn't control. And the provision of weapons by NATO saved people in Zaporizhzhia or Dnipro or Kiev or Lviv from what we've seen in Bucha. And I think this is a very noble thing that Western governments have done. Unfortunately, not enough, as we discussed today. So I would like to thank our patient audience, first and foremost, but also all the speakers, and especially Marie Mandras, who organized this event, and Marie Zinaida Jolis, whom I don't see, who organized the registration for this event, to the extent that we had no empty seats, but also no people standing. Thank you very much all for this wonderful.